The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are live on twitch.tv or wherever you get your latest podcast. You're hearing us on tape, or possibly on the VOD as well. We are back to talk all things WWE Clash at the Castle, which is just wrapped up on this Saturday afternoon. And we expected surprises. I don't think there was any doubt about that, but maybe not the surprises that we anticipated we would get from Clash at the Castle. Certainly a very interesting, but I think overall solid premium live event from WWE, as that just recently wrapped up. The press conference going on as we speak, so if we see any news items from that, we will pass it along as well. I am Matt in the studio, joined as always by Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It is going. We are back for another premium live event. It was definitely a different atmosphere than the NXT show we talked about recently, which was definitely a thing. But yeah, can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, definitely a much better crowd, even though maybe it didn't match the atmosphere of the French crowd that we had earlier this year. Definitely better than the NXT crowd and the very dead UFC Apex. So that certainly made for a much more enjoyable show. Joining us in studio is Rachel. Rachel, how's it going?
It's going good. I'm glad to be out of the house. It's been a long week, so I was glad to get some wrestling in today.
Yeah, you had a little surgery, not you, but
No.
your little one, dealing with some tonsil removals.
Yep, tonsil and adenoids, but she's recovering very well. She wants to be back to normal today. So,
well, that's good.
Yeah.
And whatever normal is, we all want to strive to get back there for sure. But glad to see her on the mend as well, and glad you could join us. We're certainly, it was an interesting premium live event, and of course this took place in Scotland, and only a 5-match card, which I think allowed them to give everything a proper amount of time, which I thought was really good, especially the opening match. I think we'll just start beginning to end. Let's start with that opening match, and it was right out of the gate for the undisputed WWE Championship in an I Quit match. It was Cody Rhodes versus AJ Styles, and that match had a little bit of everything. It was what we thought was going to be the maybe most overbooked match of the night. Turns out probably not even in the top 2 of overbooked matches of the night, but in the end it was Cody Rhodes threatening to hit AJ Styles with the steel chairs, and Styles saying, "I quit." Then he got hit anyway for his troubles. Little bit of post-match afterbirth, if you will, with the Bloodline coming out and then Owens and Orton coming out to his defense. Overall, to me, it felt like a really good way to start the show, and another really good match between two of the great veterans of our business. We'll start with Mike for this first match of the day. Mike, your thoughts on Rhodes retaining over Styles?
Yeah, I enjoyed the match. It's always tough to critique matches like this, because whenever you have a match not only with no rules but with a weird ending stipulation, it's really tough to not want to be overcritical and say, well, why didn't this person do this? Why didn't this person do this? Why didn't they just right off the bat, come out guns a-blazing trying to murder each other? And matches never transpire that way. Would have been nice if Gallows and Anderson could have made an appearance perhaps on behalf of AJ Styles, but I was a big fan of the outside of the ring action, specifically when Cody did the back rake on AJ Styles. I think we need more of that in wrestling. Yeah, the match was fine. I thought it was funny when he pulled the black bag out from under the ring and they just assumed there would be tacks in it, and it ended up being a chain and some handcuffs. We thought we knew. Guess we were wrong. But yeah, I'm curious to see what's next for Styles, but good match.
Yeah, and I thought that was funny and certainly maybe indicative that the announcers weren't necessarily involved in every last detail of the match, that they didn't realize. Maybe they thought the thumbtacks were coming, because that's typically what you see in that match. We had Cody bleeding after hitting the ring bell, and certainly that's a Cody Rhodes staple of any kind of main match you had. And two guys that definitely weren't afraid to leave it all out there, and I think I prefer this type of match to the last man standing match, because it ends up being a whole match of counting and waiting, and at least this still has that definitive moment of I quit, and rather it's not still to me as good as a pinfall type of match or a submission type of match, but you at least have that moment. Rachel, your thoughts on this one?
I thought it was a great match too. I could probably watch them wrestle every couple months. Like they work really well together. I love AJ as a heel. I think him antagonizing Cody's mom was hilarious out there, and then she smacked him a couple times. I wouldn't mind seeing AJ get a run eventually to end his before his career finally ends. But both guys look good, and I think even with all the chaos, it was a solid match.
And I think that brings up the question. The first question is, what is next for AJ Styles? As I mentioned, they had their pre-Clash in the Castle press conference yesterday before SmackDown was, I would say, taped. It was taped for the U.S. live elsewhere. But the talk of the partnership with TNA came up, and obviously we saw that continue last night with Tatum Paxley answering the open challenge of Jordan Grace and competing against Grace for the TNA Knockouts Championship on their Friday night premium event. So it makes you wonder, could that be what's next for AJ Styles, that maybe we get a chance to see him take some time away and then somehow show up over in TNA? What do you think, Mike? What's next for Styles, you think?
I mean, that's a great question. And as far as the partnership with TNA goes, you're still kind of waiting to see WWE or even NXT kind of contribute a top-tier star. I like Tatum Paxley, but I think when you have TNA basically giving you their biggest star for a couple events and then this is what you reciprocate with, I think specifically for fans of TNA and potentially people who aren't fans of either company, it's just kind of fodder for this is how they handle their dealings with other companies too. They send over someone who's maybe not quite totally ripe yet, but I would love to see them contribute bigger stars. I mean, even if take Styles, Gallows, and Anderson and have them pop up on TNA, I don't know, but I think there's a lot more you can do with it. WWE's been really slow playing everything lately, but I think you still need to do something big soon, I think.
And to WWE's defense, for people who would criticize that, number one, a lot of their talent was over in the UK for this weekend, including people who we did not see on television, people like Natalia, for example, that were over there doing press and things like that. So the chance to fly them back to do this Friday night show, you were almost set up in a situation where it almost had to be somebody from NXT because they were the few people that were actually available for this. The other thing to keep in mind, too, is this wasn't a major TNA pay-per-view. They've got one of those coming up in Slammiversary. That's coming up in July, and certainly that's where I think it makes the most sense when you look at someone like Styles, who has the history with TNA, and obviously TNA having Slammiversary, which is their big event. Why would you not go ahead and make that work? Plus, the other thing to keep in mind, too, is coming up this Tuesday on NXT, we do have the 25-person over-the-top rope battle royal to determine the number one contender for Trick Williams' championship, and I think there's a lot of belief that we're going to see some bigger-name TNA men make the switch over to be in this battle royal. I know Sami Callihan's already kind of hinted at it. The Hardys certainly would make a lot of sense with both of them in TNA. Joe Hendry's obviously somebody that is way over right now, and I think had he not been wrestling in Chicago last night, we might have seen him make a cameo today, being from Scotland. It just, obviously, there was no logistical way to get him from Chicago. Plus, they have their TV tapings tonight, so again, can't really take him out and put him on a WWE event.
Well, speaking of Hendry, if I saw correctly, I didn't follow the event Friday night, but he lost to Kazarian, correct? At the show?
Yeah.
That's someone I'd like to see in an NXT.
Yes.
Some dude who, he's never been there, and he's someone that I've always had a lot of respect for. I think that would be a really cool opportunity for him as well.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a bunch of guys over there that could potentially be in this opportunity, but it'll be interesting to see. I think the one thing WWE and TNA are doing right now is slow playing the whole thing. Which WWE, for fair or not, that is one thing that is a staple of the Triple H era, is they are going to slow play things. Sometimes you think maybe to a fault, but at the very least, we're not going to be rushing things to get to. There's not that instant gratification era that we had for so long where it's like we have to do it right now because if we don't do it right now, Vince will lose interest and they'll just drop it and forget it. We can actually let things play out over 3 and 6 months and see where it ends up.
That was kind of my thought after this match here when you had the little angle with the Neo bloodline and Cody, Orton, and Owens.
Yeah.
Was like, this whole time I've been thinking that when we get around to War Games, it would be basically 2 versions of the bloodline facing off against each other. what if that's still like a year down the road?
Could be.
What if we end up instead getting like Cody and everybody against this new bloodline in some way, shape, or form? You can't plan ahead when you don't know just how slowly they plan on doing this.
Yeah, exactly. And let's get to that point, maybe a secondary branch off of that ending angle. You have Cody, and we'll get to Rachel's thoughts on this. It appears that Solo Sikoa is next on his agenda in some shape or form. Now, will they go ahead and have him defend the title in Toronto against Solo? Will that be the SummerSlam match? We'll have to see. Obviously, we had a tease with Randy Orton, and obviously Orton's, you don't know how many days he has left. What do you see as the immediate future, maybe in the next couple of months, for Cody?
I mean, I could see Solo being the first one that goes up against Cody, but I do think, I know Cody has mentioned in the past that he'd love to face Randy Orton since he was he worked under Randy Orton with Legacy. But I think Solo is like the stepping stone to get there, at least in the meantime.
And, of course, the thing you have to keep in the back of your mind, because you continue to see stories coming out about it, is The Rock is looming somewhere down the line, whether it's the end of this year, whether it's the beginning of next year, to do something at WrestleMania for next year. So that's always a possibility. And then at some point, Roman Reigns has to come back and deal with the fallout of what has happened since he left after WrestleMania. So a lot of things are going to happen, I think, on the SmackDown side over the next few months. And like Mike said, I think it's easy to jump ahead and think that these things are going to happen. But again, you just don't know how long they're going to play this stuff out. And it'll be interesting to see. But Cody wins a really good match. AJ Styles certainly acquitted himself well, as he always does. But in the end, Cody ends up defending the title in 27-46 to remain the undisputed WWE champion. Next up, we had the Women's Tag Team Championship. It was the champions, Jade Cargill and Bianca Belair, taking on Shayna Baszler and Zoe Stark, and Isla Dawn and Alba Fire, the natives of Scotland. And in the end, it was Dawn and Fire getting the win in just over 12 minutes to win in their home country. Maybe that should have been a sign that the rest of the night wasn't going to go great for Scotland, but they get the win. Very emotional, great reaction. Obviously, been a lot going on outside of wrestling for them and in wrestling. Let's just kind of get to the champions first, and we'll kind of talk about the match. Your thoughts on those two, and especially with all the stuff you know behind the scenes, them actually winning that match.
I was so excited to see them win. I wouldn't have picked them by any means. I didn't pick them to win. But after, realizing Alba Fire's mom passed away just in the last week or so in just a horrific accident. And obviously she's still working. Like, Alba Fire came to Scotland. She knew that, she still had to work, and I feel like they rewarded her for still just keep pressing on. And obviously they're good. They had huge pop when they came out. They loved, especially Alba Fire. So I'm glad they won.
Yeah, it was great to see them win it. And I think you saw a lot of social media support from other women in the company for them winning it. So clearly, I think this is a really popular decision in the locker room, in addition to being popular out in front of the camera. But the match itself, and I kind of get to Mike, I feel like it got off to a pretty good start. It's a different format than WWE. They've used it a little more, but generally the triple threat matches, even with tag teams, has been 2 people in the ring, and then you can tag whoever in. This was 3 people in the ring, which is really the more common sense way to do it. But the problem is you also now bring 3 people into the ring at all times, which can cause some communication issues. And we saw Jade Cargill slip when she was trying a springboard move coming into, which wouldn't be the last major ropes issue we had. We'll get to that in a little bit. And then, Bianca Belair's splash off the top rope, the 450, that seemed like a rough landing as well. It seemed like from the moment you had Cargill struggle with that springboard, the match kind of got a little disjointed at that point.
Yeah, it definitely felt like the match kind of went off the rails from that point moving forward. First, I do want to say, big fan of Fire and Dawn. I've enjoyed their work back since NXT, and was really hoping they'd eventually do something with both of them. I think they're a team that you can really build a tag division around, whereas maybe with Belair and Cargill, it's tough to really make their opponents look good against them because they are so just physically overpowering, and you're not going to have Cargill sell a lot of offense. I think this is probably what's best for the division as a whole. And really, Belair and Cargill, to me, they don't look like a tag team. No. They just look like two single stars that they've grouped together. You know, there's nothing about either one of them that you think like. Clearly, they're very similar people. They just don't really seem that way to me. Both physically impressive, but just otherwise, this seems like a mismatch. Yeah, after that springboard, things got a little crazy. You had Cargill in the Kirifuda clutch, which looked really awkward too. Like they weren't really sure what they were supposed to do after that. And ultimately, it did end in a really awkward victory for Alba Fire and Isla Dawn, which I'm thankful for. But I think triple threat matches, especially when you have someone in there who might be a little green still, can get kind of crazy.
And you kind of wondered, looking back on it, if the Kirifuda clutch wasn't an audible that Shayna, being one of the veterans in the match, basically called to kind of slow everything back down. Like, okay, we need to reset this situation here, and maybe. And
she might have even told her that, because if you recall, when she had her in the clutch, she was kind of like knelt down over her, which isn't really typically how you're tapping someone out with it.
Yeah, maybe a chance to just kind of reset what was going on. But they did get there, and I think you mentioned the former champions now. I think we knew that this was a temporary pairing. This was clearly a chance, and I think probably in the short term was a good decision because it continued to get them on television, continued to let Jade Cargill have her development continue on television. Bianca Belair is kind of in a situation where she's not in the title picture, so she kind of needs something to be relevant on television because she is one of your big stars. You've got to have her on TV. And now I think we'll see some sort of split between those two, whether it's amicable or not, so that they can kind of regain their focus in the singles division. You look at Dawn and Fire, I hope this is an opportunity for them to actually build the women's tag division. And I've had the same critiques of the men's tag division that I feel like they've done a better job by splitting the belts on the men's side, but they haven't really built a lot of tag teams. I mean, yesterday on SmackDown, they had Ashanti the Adonis and Cedric Alexander just sitting in the crowd.
Yeah.
It's like, put them on your show, on this show where you're clearly using people that you don't normally use. How about having them wrestle a match?
I thought that was really odd, between them and Andrade, just being in the crowd for this event.
How weird.
Like, you could have them wrestle. Like, you could get a couple of Scottish local guys and have them have a 6-minute match and have those guys go over. And, I feel like the same thing is true on the women's side. They haven't done a great job of building contenders. I'm hoping that with these two veterans in the ring, maybe we'll get some sort of women's tag division and out of this. Rachel, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think, even if you have like Shayna and Zoe stay together, like they would make sense as a tag team. They just need to start building some more tag. There's not enough people. There's too many women for the main title. They almost need to start making some little tag teams just to elevate that title too.
Well, they've got too many women that are good right now in WWE that there's no reason you shouldn't have a well-built-out tag division and potentially even a mid-card title on the main roster as well. I mean, we've seen NXT certainly can book their women well enough to justify that. But it'll be interesting to see how it goes on. Overall, I think it was great to let the locals get the win. And I'm anxious to see. I hope they get a title reign. I hope they don't just turn around and drop them right back to Belair and Cargill on Raw or SmackDown.
You don't want it to feel like the Iconics tag title victory at WrestleMania, where it was like this great feel-good moment, and then it just didn't last.
Yeah, you just immediately have them turn around and lose them. Yeah. So now, if you tell me you have them defend them against those two, and then those two have a miscommunication, and that causes Fire and Dawn to win and retain, and that starts to build the breakup of those two, of Cargill and Belair, I'd be okay with that. But,
yeah.
I don't want to see them turn around and drop those like a hot potato, because that's not a way to build your division up. I'm not saying every title reign needs to be 6 months long, but it probably should be longer than a week.
They need to feel important.
Well, in a way, you're almost building it like you built the World Heavyweight title, where you had Seth Rollins carrying it for a while just to kind of set something in place and have some stability, and then you can go from there.
And defending it. Not just carrying it, but actually having great matches against a lot of people and a lot of people getting elevated. So hopefully that is what they plan on doing here. But we'll be interested to see how this goes forward. One more match we'll talk about before we go to the break on the podcast version of this. Glad for everybody who's joined us live here on Twitch as we recap WWE Clash at the Castle. It was the Intercontinental Championship, and Turns out this might have been the most overbooked match of the night. I don't know. The main event probably gave it a run for its money, but it was also probably one of the better matches of the night, if not the best match of the night. And it was Sami Zayn defending the Intercontinental Championship against Chad Gable. Maxine Dupree and Otis were ringside. In the end, it was Sami Zayn, thanks to a lot of stuff that happened. Basically getting a distraction that allowed him to hit the haluva kick to get the win in 22-15. Gable clearly on the verge of a full-blown meltdown. Now, first off, Gable did announce this week that he has re-signed with WWE. I think we're now really going to head into the Chad Gable villain arc. I think that is where this goes from here. Mike, just general thoughts, though, first before we get into the aftermath on the match itself, which I thought was really good.
Yeah, I thought this had the best wrestling as far as just pure wrestling goes of any match on the card. The kind of back and forth attempted German suplexes ending up in the half and half suplex where Gable got dropped on his head was pretty brutal. It took a while for all the nonsense involved in the match to unfold, but I think we needed some sort of forward progression on this storyline. Excited that Gable has re-signed because I think WWE is kind of where he's going to best be able to flex both his wrestling and his character work, which at times eclipses his wrestling work, I think. He's a guy that has definitely moved into the Kurt Angle realm of what he can do on the mic and as an interesting character, and kind of excited to see what's next in the story.
And I think, as much as people will criticize the Vince era of Gable's booking, which certainly deserves all the criticism, I think the one thing that Chad Gable was smart enough to figure out during that era is that if he could learn how to play ball and develop characters, whether it was Shorty G or whatever it was, that was going to serve him long term, even after Vince was gone. And I think that's the case, that he's figured out how to do the character part of his wrestling persona because he got saddled with really crappy characters. And now that he can actually show off the wrestling to go with it, it's really elevated him to a totally different level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rachel, your thoughts, because obviously there's a lot to talk about. Zayn obviously winning, which is great. We'll see where that goes from here. But with Gable, you just get the feeling that something really bad's about to happen to Otis and Maxine and potentially Tozawa.
I mean, he is a scary heel. Like, when they showed his face at the end of the match, when he's just staring into the camera pretty much, like staring off towards Sami, and he looked like he was his head was about to explode. That was scary. I think it was a fantastic match. I love Sami and Chad. I think Gable is one of the best wrestlers they have right now. I think he's a great heel. I think he's going to be that sleazy, like trying to like trick his way into winning matches. And that obviously showed that tonight. He tried to figure out ways to get his like Otis and Maxine to help him win. I fear for Otis and Maxine and Akira Tozawa this week. I hope everything goes okay for them.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. And the other thing that's maybe interesting, because we talk about Sami Zayn and what's next for him, this is the second straight match he's had where the Uncle Howdy QR codes have popped up during his match. And obviously the countdown clock leads to Raw on Monday night. Doesn't necessarily mean that the whole thing's going to come about because, again, we're in the slow play era, so that doesn't necessarily mean it's all going to be over. But it'll be interesting to see if indeed it is tied to Zayn, or is it tied to Gable, or what it is. 'Cause I saw the one caption on one of the pictures talking about like you don't say thank you anymore or something like that, which would lead you to think maybe it has to do with Gable instead. But really kind of interested to see what happens on Raw, because if that all does start to play out, that adds a whole new wrinkle to all this.
I think that would be a really safe place to introduce the Uncle Howdy stable and what they're going to do. If nothing else, they're going to put on great matches. I mean, Bo Dallas had good matches back in NXT back in the day, probably with Sami Zayn. So,
right.
That wouldn't be a bad thing.
And I would think, knowing the kind of guy that Sami Zayn is that you would think maybe he would even suggest being someone they would work with just to make sure that they come in and have something important to do right out of the gate so they don't flounder.
Yeah.
Because obviously you do wonder, the one thing we've talked about with this whole thing is, who's the star in this group? Who's the world title person? And maybe, again, just like with Judgment Day, maybe we don't know who that person is yet. Maybe they don't come in right away. But right now it feels like a group that should be kind of upper mid-card, being generous maybe. And this could potentially be where they're actually going to be slotted in.
The trick's going to be, how do you make them seem threatening without making them be unbeatable?
Yeah.
Because the problem they had with Wyatt initially was when they gave him the title, it was like, okay, eventually he has to lose this. How do we do that?
And still make him look strong.
Yeah, and then you end up with that abomination that was his cell match with Seth Rollins.
Oh.
Yeah, Seth Rollins' character took quite a while and probably ruined his first babyface run with that whole match, and certainly didn't help Wyatt either. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they have this plan to be booked. Again, right now with WWE, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt because they seem to have a good grasp on how to do things. We'll see. The internet is not as forgiving, but the live crowd is typically much more forgiving. I think. You read the reactions on Reddit during tonight's event, and you compare it to the way the crowd's reacting, and it's like, those things don't really equate all the time. So we'll kind of see how it all shakes out. If you're listening to the podcast version of this, we are going to step aside for a break. We come back, our final two matches of the card. We've got the WWE Women's Championship and the World Heavyweight Championship to wrap up WWE Clash at the Castle. We will step aside for a timeout. We'll be back on the other side of this break here on the Nerdcast Empire. Back on the Nerdcast Empire, live on Twitch, as we have tended to be over the past few weeks. Thank you to everybody who's either been with us live or have watched the VODs of these on Twitch. You can watch the VODs on YouTube, or you can continue to download this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And from the numbers, looks like people are doing a little bit of everything. We really appreciate that. Don't forget to check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. We have a store there. You can check out our store, pick up your Nerdcast Empire merch. We're going to be back in a little over 24 hours' time with another edition of Music Weekly. We are going to be looking at the music of May the 31st, and not to give away too many spoilers, but it may be one of the best weeks of music we've ever had on this show.
Stacked week. I listened to a few more things today that I hadn't gotten to in totality yet, and they were both fantastic.
Yeah, it's going to be a really, really good week, I think. So make sure you check that out tomorrow night. 7 o'clock Eastern Time with another edition of Music Weekly. And then on Thursday, we'll have another episode of Anime Thursdays. I don't know what we're going to talk about yet. We'll talk about something on Thursday. We'll get that figured out. If nothing else, we'll do some news headlines coming up on Thursday. Always news to talk about. Maybe we'll even start talking about the upcoming summer season, which is just around the corner. Sure. Might be able to get some shows figured out as far as what is going to be must-watch coming up in the summer of 2024. That'll be coming up on the Nerdcast Empire. Let's get to our final two matches on this card. The WWE Women's Championship was contested next. Another local. It was Piper Niven trying to defeat Bayley to win that WWE Women's Championship. A very short match, relatively speaking, 13:35. But in the end, Bayley with a crucifix bomb, if you will, getting the pin over Piper Niven. Felt like a pretty solid match. Again, I think Bayley is very underrated in the ring. It was great to see Piper Niven kind of have this moment. Felt like the crowd was a little worn out from the Zayn match before it with Gable, but they did kind of come around there at the end. Bayley gets the win. Piper Niven kind of got the appreciation of the crowd at the end. I think it feels like it went the way I kind of assumed it would go, but you never know on these cards. Rachel, we'll start with you. Your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I thought it was a good match. I think also Chelsea Green is just a national treasure, and I think pairing her with Piper Niven has been fantastic for both of them. Even her coming out with the luchador match halfway through the match, that was hilarious. Piper. I kind of forgot how good she is for being a larger woman wrestler. I think she can definitely hold her own with anybody on the roster and could easily be in the main event picture in the future. Bayley's so over, and I love Bayley, and I think I'm glad that she's getting a decent run because I think she just deserves all her flowers. Yeah, I think it was a solid match, but like you said, I do agree. I think the crowd was a little tired at the beginning. Like, they didn't really react to either wrestler coming out, at least not to the extent of like Cody or even Drew McIntyre in the last match. Like, it was just kind of slow start for them.
Mike, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I thought the match was fine. I was a little tired going into it, to be honest. Everything we'd seen up to that point had been kind of draining after a while, but Chelsea Green is super entertaining. I was a little disappointed when they first sent her off. I I had no idea she was going to reemerge, which was one of the highlights of the match.
Supposedly it was her. We don't really know.
Yeah, it could have been anybody, but I'm guessing. Yeah, you how do I want to put this? Not that I don't think Piper Niven could be a champion someday, but the way she's been handled up to this point, I think just giving her this opportunity to wrestle in a title match in front of her home country, that in and of itself is a victory.
Yeah.
Like, not every person has to win in front of their home crowd for it to be a net positive, and I think, for wrestling someone that is as internationally popular as Bayley seems to be, the crowd was still behind Niven to some degree, and I think that's really encouraging. I think she showed that she could be a contender moving forward if they plan to go that route. Otherwise, I don't know really what's next for Bayley, but the match was fine.
Yeah, I feel like they were in a tough spot because Bayley is very popular in the UK. That's really, even when she was a heel, they were still singing along to her song. And I think the crowd wanted to get behind Piper Niven, but they also love Bayley. So they were really in a spot, even though it was face versus heel, and WWE certainly did everything in the build-up correct to make those rules clear. You just had a crowd that, because of the people involved, were going to be split, and I think that added to them being just a little bit quiet at the beginning.
And I do kind of feel like there was that point where Bayley did probably like 5 top rope moves in succession. To me, it almost felt like she was trying to heel it up a little bit to garner more support for Niven. But, the crowd kind of split, but certainly wasn't against anyone for the most part.
Yeah, I feel like they were for everybody. And like you said, I'm not really sure what's next for Bayley. I feel like this is where you could potentially see Belair or Cargill working into the singles picture, or maybe it becomes a triple threat. Maybe those two have a blow up and you end up doing some sort of triple threat. Because you have SummerSlam coming up. Obviously, Money in the Bank is first, but SummerSlam not too far after that, so you kind of have to start thinking big title picture for her, and so it'll be interesting to see who they line up for her.
Yeah.
But overall, nothing wrong with the match. I thought they did a nice job for only having about 13 minutes. I thought the match did everything it needed to do in that time, and certainly Niven got a chance, as you said, to have her flowers in front of her home crowd, which again I think is really cool. On to the main event. It's a good thing you mentioned that, sometimes you don't need to win in front of your home crowd. Sometimes just wrestling in front of them is enough. Don't know if this is what you had in mind.
Maybe it doesn't always apply.
It's the World Heavyweight Championship main event, and it was Damian Priest defending his world title against Drew McIntyre. It ended up deciding our pick'em this week as well because Rachel picked Damian Priest, and I picked Drew McIntyre, and the winner of that match was going to decide which of the two of us ended up on top, and ended up being Damian Priest in 2019 to win. Of course, the way it happened, it looked like McIntyre had it won. We had a ref bump. Second referee comes down. It was shot brilliantly by the WWE production people. Again, we talk about it every time we do one of these podcasts, how much better their production people are. But as soon as the referee slides into the ring, you can clearly tell it's CM Punk. And, of course, he doesn't count 3. And then McIntyre tries to rough him up, and Punk kicks him in the nuts. And then, of course, Priest comes around, hits the South of Heaven, referee rolls back in, counts to 3, and Damian Priest survives. Really what was a very physical match that nearly got ugly when Priest got tangled up in the ropes, and whether he had actual damage to his leg or he was just selling the rest of the match, I don't know. We'll find out probably in the days and weeks to come, maybe even in the press conference as to how banged up he really is. But those two put on a really great match after that. They recovered from that spot really well, as you would expect two veterans of the ring to do. The storytelling is perfect because CM Punk has already proven that he will stop at nothing to make Drew McIntyre's life miserable, and there's no better way to make his life miserable than to have him lose in front of all of his home countrymen again. The only thing, like Mike said, it was missing was Tyson Fury coming out.
Wanted to sing with him
wanted
again.
to sing with him at the end of the premium live event. But obviously this is going to send McIntyre into just a psychotic shock probably and set up what could be one of the biggest money matches WWE's done in a long time at SummerSlam with Punk and McIntyre. But Mike, let's get your thoughts overall on the match before we kind of speculate on what's to come.
Yeah, crowd was hugely behind McIntyre, not surprising. They really got the decibels up there. I would really like to see Damian Priest retire that like step up middle rope tope that he does. That was the move that he got his leg caught in the ropes during, and I thought they worked it really well for what there's no way was planned. It all worked out. There had to be some sort of pain there because if not, he's the greatest seller of all time. Like, even little things about how he was climbing the ropes for the rest of the match. Like, there was one point where he kind of, like, used his arms to propel himself up to the second rope instead of climbing normally. It just... I don't think that could have all just been selling a worked injury. The bump that the ref took that sent him flying off the apron into the barricade was probably one of my favorite ref bumps of all time. But the match itself was great. You know, you never know what you're going to get with two bigger guys, but I think these guys are both athletic enough where they can work at a good pace without presumably having to kill themselves. The power moves still look really good. They throw great punches. I love that CM Punk has no problem with just making himself the most hated man in front of tens of thousands of people in Scotland. That's just part of CM Punk, and I think it's amazing. I don't know how else to describe it. Him standing there with the one fan giving him the double bird, just perpetually, like he wouldn't stop, was just hilarious to me.
Which was great because the next time they cut to Punk, he's like being hugged by
several. He had found a couple guys with CM Punk shirts and was hanging with them.
I mean, that's why. Honestly, that's the reason, not to get too far off of the track, but that's the biggest thing that AEW misses by running Punk out of the company is he has a brain for the business and he understands old school pro wrestling. And old school pro wrestling, some territories you were liked and some territories you weren't liked in. And you just do what is honest to your character and you let the fans decide whether that's good or bad. Because he'll never be booed in Chicago, ever.
No.
Never going to be booed in Chicago. And he was never going to be cheered today. So, why, it just doesn't faze him. And, they don't have, because the old WWE, they would have had the crowd, oh, this is Wacko World. They'd be justifying Punk's actions instead of just, kind of calling it for what it is. These are two guys that could both be baby faces, but they absolutely hate each other's guts. And part of McIntyre eventually, his cycle to come back around to being a full-fledged babyface is having to get over this anger issue problem and blaming everybody else. And that's really the heart of this issue is that Punk is justified in what he did because McIntyre's being a hypocrite, whether it's him trying to babyface it up for the last week and try to, do the things that you would think WWE would normally do when you're going to go to a place where he's going to be cheered.
McIntyre's the justified heel. Everything that he's doing makes sense in his world because CM Punk is everything that Seth Rollins called him when he first came back. Yeah. Everything that... And you go back to with McIntyre, even like when Jey Uso came to Raw, it's like McIntyre was right about all of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like
most heels or good heels should be truthful. Like they're telling you the truth, but it is a one-sided truth. The fact of the matter is that Punk sees McIntyre being the hypocrite, whether it's, everything he's done, and he's just going to continue to make his life miserable until they have this match where he can, presumably beat him. I don't know. We'll see. It really could go either way. But, before... And I think the same thing with Gable. Before he has that big triumph, I'm not talking about the Intercontinental title, but if he's ever to win the world title, he's got to come all the way back around full circle, too, because he's somebody the crowd's going to want to cheer when they have that moment. Yeah. So his character's got... Now, he's much farther back on the dark arc. He is not... Gable's got a lot of darkness to go through still. I think McIntyre's a lot closer to the light, as we saw this weekend, but this whole Punk thing is going to be the thing that's going to really push him into the deep darkness, and it's going to be fascinating to see. Rachel, your thoughts on all this?
The match was great. I picked Damian Priest for the reason that I figured CM Punk was going to do some kind of shenanigans and screw over Drew McIntyre. It just made so much sense. But CM Punk's, he's that person that someone just wants to punch because he's just going to be a menace to society, and he's definitely a menace to Drew McIntyre. I cannot wait for the eventual match between them because I think it's going to be a physical match. I think it's going to be probably one of the best matches of the year.
Yeah, I think it's going to. Who knows, like whether they'll do a stipulation or if it'll just be a regular match or whatever it might be, and how the build to that's going to be over the next few weeks, because we don't know how close Punk is to getting cleared. You have to assume with this angle, pretty close, if not already there. And that's not a match they're going to do in Toronto. No offense to Toronto people, but Toronto's got Money in the Bank. That is going to be the attraction of Toronto. You're going to probably have a couple of title matches as well. Obviously, we're going to have Gunther wrestling Priest for the world title, assuming Priest is healthy enough to have that.
Right.
But you're not going to put Punk versus McIntyre on that card. Like, it's already going to be probably a 5 or 6 match card, and 2 of those matches are Money in the Bank, and one of them is Gunther versus Priest. So, and you presumably 1 or 2 women's matches, and your card's pretty much done already. Like, I've just saved them weeks of booking. They've got that figured out.
They're doing that at Money in the Bank.
I thought they were doing a SummerSlam.
Is it SummerSlam?
I was thinking maybe SummerSlam.
Okay, so it could be Summer. That would make a little more sense if they hold off on that for a little bit longer, especially with only 3 weeks to go. And that's probably good for Priest, because if he's going to be able to actually have that match, having 6 weeks to recover instead of 3 would be better. So that would make a little more sense if it's not until SummerSlam. But
one other thing about McIntyre and CM Punk, it amazed me before McIntyre re-signed that there were people that were thinking that he wouldn't. And when you see kind of what you have on the table now with he and Punk, and you knew that feud was coming, why would he even consider going elsewhere? Like, what would be the point in that?
Yeah.
This is money. And the end of today's show just further proves that.
I think when you look at Gable and you look at McIntyre and their decision to sign or not re-sign, I think with McIntyre, it was much more about having the ability to take time off to be with his family, more so than, like, the money.
Yeah.
Like, I think with Gable, there could be an element of that. But I think also with Gable, it's like, okay, I played ball. You need to show me the money. You need to show me that I'm going to be a serious contender and that we're going to go somewhere. I think that was what showed him he needed to stay. With McIntyre, I think it really was. I think some of those things he said in his promos about missing things for his family and constantly being on the road, I think he wanted assurances that if he stayed, like, he was going to have some freedom to say, hey, I need to go be with my wife, or I need to go do this thing. And I think that's what the company was able, the new WWE was able to say, like, yes, because there was no doubt they were going to pay him the big money. But clearly at some point in your life, and he's getting up there in age, like, the time off sometimes is more important than the money. And I think once they were able to say, like, yeah, well, because I already read that just as they did with War Games, they're not doing press junkets the week of Money in the Bank because it would have fallen on July 4th. And they didn't want the wrestlers to travel on July 4th.
Nice.
So let them be at home and then travel over the next day. So it's the little things like that are much different about this company now than they were even 2 years ago.
It's being run like a real company.
Yeah.
It's if you work for any type of major, large multinational company, these are the kind of things that are normal. Just for the longest time, WWE, even being a publicly traded company, was being run like a really strict mom and pop shop. And I think that's one of the first things that kind of disappeared under this new regime without Vince.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest difference, the biggest improvements. So one last thing before we get to our final thoughts on this, and it just popped into my head, since we've been talking about so many of these future plans, let's have a little fun with this, and we'll have this recorded so we can go back and look at it. So I want you each to think of something, some bold prediction, something that's going to happen in the WWE universe, and it could be WWE, it could be NXT, between now and, let's say, SummerSlam. Let's call it over the next 6 to 7 weeks. Some bold prediction that you think is going to happen. And I'll go first just so that you two can have a little bit more time to think about this. My bold prediction is that a TNA contracted wrestler will hold a WWE championship before SummerSlam. And I think it'll be NXT, obviously, but I think somebody from TNA is going to come in and just to really have that shock value. I think whether it's the North American title, whether it's a tag team championship, whether it's their women's championship, somebody from TNA is going to hold WWE Championship between now and SummerSlam.
Oh, man.
I could totally see that.
Yeah.
I think, especially tag titles, I could see that making a lot of sense. There's a lot of really good tag teams over there. I mean, you think of Chris Bay and Ace Austin. I'd love to see him come in and wrestle Axiom and Nathan Fraser. That would be really awesome. But Rachel, you want to?
Ooh, I'm trying to think.
Think of something.
putting me on the spot.
Oh, man.
Obviously, no consequences for these picks. They could be really wrong, but just something that you might think. And it could be just results of an upcoming match or a debut or, something that maybe we're not thinking about that.
Well, I think Roman could come back by SummerSlam.
You think Roman will come back?
If not at SummerSlam, I think he'll come back, and we'll see where the bloodline's going to go from there. If he'll be, I don't think he'll be on Solo's side, so then it leads into the fall season of Bloodline versus Bloodline.
That could be. Although while Mike thinks about that, the possibility, kind of what Mike and I were talking about last night that we floated out there, is the possibility that the rest of the Tongans, because obviously Hikaleo's on his way as Tala Tonga.
Yes.
That they're going to turn on Solo Sikoa and bring in Jacob Fatu to lead their group. And then Solo ends up back on the side of the Usos and Roman, and that ends up being that the bloodline breakdown somewhere down the line. Just a thought, because we'll see. I think, you get the chance to have Solo have his world title shot against Cody and probably lose. And then maybe
question his authority.
And then, because, we know Jacob Fatu's coming. We just don't know when.
Right.
That dude is
a beast.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. Mike, any thoughts on your bold prediction?
Oh, man, nothing yet. I'll have to take more time to think about it.
I will tell you that, I guess during the press conference, CM Punk said he won't be at Raw this week. He's going to be at the doctor, and hopefully he'll be on SmackDown on Friday to hopefully give some good news.
Which, of course, SmackDown is in Chicago Friday, so,
of course,
that would make sense to go ahead and have him show up. Plus, of course, he's nowhere near McIntyre, who's going to be irate and looking for him. Yes. So that's not a huge surprise.
He believes he'll be cleared on Monday, is what he apparently has also said.
So I have a feeling.
That would be awesome.
I have a feeling they know that's coming. So be very interesting to see how that shakes out. But certainly an interesting premium live event. Again, WWE putting on a really quality show, another international show. We've got another one coming up in 3 weeks' time with a whole international weekend. They're going to be going to Toronto for SmackDown on Friday, and then Money in the Bank on Saturday, and then NXT Heatwave on Sunday. And I know there's a lot of talk about that could potentially be the debut of Julia in NXT against Roxanne Perez, but we'll see. I like the way NXT ended this week, where they brought a lot of their women out to show, like, hey, our women's division is still really good. You don't have to keep talking about people that don't work here. Like, here's all of our really good women. So it'll be really, really interesting. Rachel, final thoughts on this premium live event?
It was a solid event. I feel like, especially after the NXT event, like, the matches seemed long, which, was fine. The matches were great. But with the NXT matches, they were all so short. So it was kind of hard to... it's been a long week, so I can understand why the crowd got tired, but I thought the matches were great. I hope Damian Priest is okay. That's really where my mind is. I hope his ankle's okay.
Yeah, I think that is going to be the first storyline coming out of this event. Is Priest going to be? Is he okay? Is he okay enough that he doesn't have to relinquish the title, knowing that he doesn't have to defend it for a few weeks? So hopefully that means he'll be able to get healthy in time to have the match with Gunther and be able to put on a good match there. Could very well be the beginning of the Gunther era as world champion coming up at SummerSlam. Mike, your final thoughts?
Yeah, the card was fine. It is a little weird when you're talking about a main roster show having longer matches than what we saw with the last NXT event. That doesn't seem typical at all. I'm glad to see that the Scottish wrestlers didn't get totally shut out, so we did have that to go on, and really excited about what's next for a lot of the competitors. Definitely the McIntyre Punk situation. Hoping Priest is okay and find out what's next for him in Judgment Day.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is you have the whole Judgment Day Liv Morgan storyline that's clearly going on as well with Finn pocketing the key on Raw. And then we have the Uncle Howdy situation, which is coming up. We're going to find out, I would think, something on Raw this week as to what's going to happen next with that. So there's
multiple people in that group. So you're not just going to see, I assume, them interject themselves in one feud. It's going to be multiple, possibly over both brands or all three brands. Who knows?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And my hope is that, out of respect to Bray Wyatt, the fans, especially live fans, will give it a chance to play out and not be so quick to kind of hate on it. It's very easy to be cynical when you read online because people are always negative online. It seems like the live crowds have always been more receptive to that stuff. So my guess is they will be, and it'll be really good. But who they attack, or if maybe they don't attack anybody, who knows? Maybe their leader is already here. Maybe, that main event person that we think needs to be in that group is already currently on our television. What if Zayn was leading that group instead of being the target of that group?
That would be weird.
You just don't know. It's going to be interesting to see, but it's an exciting time because there's a lot of unknowns, and that doesn't even count the TNA involvement, which I think is going to continue to play out over the next few weeks. And they're doing TV tapings tonight, so we might get an idea of what their next few TVs are going to look like. And, of course, NXT Tuesday, I think, is the next big moment as to how this, crossover continues. And
I would love to see someone non-TNA, non-WWE in that Battle Royal Tuesday.
Yeah.
That'd be huge.
And you brought up the other thing. That kind of jogged my memory with my last thought before we sign off for today. Pro Wrestling Noah and WWE are supposed to make an announcement tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that's
right.
supposed to be the 16th, so that really could happen anytime because it's already the 16th in Japan. So that could potentially be something to keep an eye on. Maybe that's the locker room somebody's going to come out of.
Sure.
You don't know, but there's obviously, we got the announcement this week of Io Sky going to be wrestling in Marigold. Mm-hmm. A bunch of other wrestlers talking about they want to wrestle in Marigold. So I think it's a very interesting time because WWE's got a lot of interesting things going on just inside their brand. But this idea that we might start seeing some cooperation almost makes it a completely unpredicted, unprecedented time for WWE.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm really excited to see that. But that's going to wrap things up for our Clash at the Castle recap and kind of wrestling news in general as we kind of branched out to all the other stuff going on. A big thanks to everybody who joined us live for this one on Twitch, or if you watched or listened on our VOD, we appreciate that as well. Don't forget to check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. Of course, we've got our store there. You can listen to all the previous podcasts. This is episode 69. We'll have episode 70 tomorrow with Music Weekly as we talk about the music of May the 31st. It's hard to believe we are already 70 episodes into this venture, but we appreciate everybody for listening, and whether you listen on the podcast or version or if you listen on Twitch or on YouTube. We'll be back 7 o'clock Eastern tomorrow night with Music Weekly. A big thanks to the entire crew for a long day of wrestling. We'll have another premium live event for a few weeks, but in the beginning of July, we'll be talking Heat Wave. We'll be talking Money in the Bank as well. So lots of good stuff coming down. And of course, if there's other news breaks in the meantime, we may jump on and do breaking news podcasts as well. You never know where you're going to find us. Big thing we want to continue to kind of push, and we'll start to push on this Twitch page. Please follow us on Twitch. We're looking to get to that 50 follower mark. That allows us to be monetized and make a little money off of this. We'd certainly appreciate that. We've met all the other goals. We just need to get to 50 followers, so hopefully we can get there sometime later this summer. That's going to wrap things up. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support. We'll be back with you in about 24 hours' time with another episode of Music Weekly. For the entire crew, for everybody who's listened, I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.